Win big in 2024 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the Live Draft Assistant, Free Agent Finder, and Lineup Optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major fantasy platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code KNUCKLER. Just visit rotoballer.com/radio and start rotoballing like a boss. This podcast is also brought to you by Parlay Play Fantasy Sports. Use my referral code RotoBrady. Get that sweet, sweet deposit bonus. They've got free contests, paid contests coming to a state near you. They're boosting lines and slashing things and giving out bonuses all day long. Check it out. That's a platform you can have some fun on. And what is up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you episode 150 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that, and we've got UFC Noche, a.k.a. UFC 306 this weekend.
Break out the red panties.
Yeah, and a word on last week. We were going to have Connor Bones Sloan on tonight because we both wanted to redeem ourselves from that collective effort last week. That was a tough one. A lot of our favorite picks fell through. What are you gonna do? But we got the Contender Series. I did go 3 of 4 on picks for the Contender Series, including 2 Method of Victory. We've got a lot of MMA this week. LFA 192, Bellator, KSW. There's the Canelo Berlanga fight. For picks on all of that kind of stuff and the Contender Series, follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. We've got some exciting interlude episodes from the MMA community coming up, so look out for those. Come out to the RotoBaller MMA Discord on Saturday before the card starts and throughout. Let's talk about UFC 306 and what you're doing for DFS and what you're playing for the night. And check out my MMA DFS Values Picks article coming out on Friday afternoons. So this is a conversation I would have loved to have had with Connor this week, but UFC Noche. You know, there has been a lot of talk about the production aspects of this, and it sounds like the UFC has come up with some creative ideas. You know, the whole find all the Easter eggs and the movies that play in between thing and get 25,000. That's cool. The way they described it, you know, a love letter to the Mexican community and to the fighting spirit and their contributions to the fighting world. It's a cool idea, doing it at the Sphere. I'm sure for those in attendance and hopefully for those of us watching at home, it's still going to be a cool production to watch. You hope so, that it adds, you know, that extra bit of flair. The problem definitely is, like, you know, not enough Mexican stars of a certain level of prominence on this card. You would have liked to have had all of them. You know, like every single one. Having Raul Rosas Jr. is a big deal, for sure. But definitely some aspects of this is like falling flat. It does seem very strange to go head-to-head with a Canelo pay-per-view on, you know, a week like this. And the other thing, too, is we had constantly been sold from Dana White that this was going to be the most spectacular combat sports event in the history of fighting. Those are big words, and it very well still could be. But the card, you know, you would have thought that there would have been more to it. Not to say that I'm not excited for this pay-per-view. We got 10 fights for this, and I think that makes sense because it would go till 4 in the morning with all the production aspects that they're talking about. This card gets popping at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. 10 fights, and we start off with a bantamweight matchup between Raul Rosas Jr., however he says it, man. I can't mimic that dude, but what a character. Against Aori K. Ling. Raul Rosas Jr., he is 9.7K in DFS, in DraftKings this week. He is the minus 800 favorite. Aori K. Ling, the plus 550 underdog. K. Ling, you know, actually is the winner of 3 of his last 5 fights. A win over Jay Perrin, Cameron Else, and Johnny Munoz. Losses to Ayman Zahabi, and a no contest against Daniel Marcos his last time out February of this year. Also has losses to Cody Durden and Jeff Molina. Cody Durden, who came up big this past week, for sure. Raul Rosas Jr., All right. 4 wins of his last 5 fights, 2 in a row. The only loss came to Christian Rodriguez. He did get worked in that fight and only landed 2 strikes. Landed more takedowns than strikes in that fight, April of last year. But it has come a long way. You know, the 2 pretty easy submissions against Terrence Mitchell and Ricky Tercios. So, you know, in comparison for these 2, I think that this is one where you have to opt for Raul Rosas Jr., and I think that you have to believe in this dude's talent at this point, and that it should only get better, because this isn't a giant leap up in competition, a very moderate one. It is, from Ricky Tercios. The crowd's going to be behind him. I think that's probably going to be the case for the rest of his career. This dude is still just 20 years old. El Nino Problema. Really, like Enrique Lang, I've liked him in some spots, you know, like against Johnny Munoz and maybe Jay Perrin. I feel like I've been more disappointed by him than the results actually say. But I do think Raul Rosas Jr. is just above that threshold already that K. Lang is capable of beating. And I don't think there's a whole lot more upward growth that's going to be happening for Aori K. Lang. Raul Rosas Jr., really, like, the sky is the limit for that dude. I think Raul Rosas Jr. wins this fight probably like 85 times out of 100. Maybe minus 800 is crazy. But, and, you know, maybe like over 1.5. Let's see. Yeah, like, I could see this going over 1.5. And that number is minus 105. Rosas Jr., by submission, minus 155. I think that is very reasonable. I like him in DFS because, like, hoping it's not going to be a decision. I think that the control time is definitely going to be there if the fight goes past round 1. But Rosas Jr. by submission, I think, is very reasonable. I don't necessarily think K. Lang is a guy that, like, can get TKO'd by Rosas Jr. as it stands right now. I think he's maybe just a little bit too durable for that. Raul Rosas Jr. by decision plus 400. I think that's the second best option you go with. Past that, if you're doubting Raul Rosas Jr. at all, or you think this is a big, kind of build-up spot for him to be let down, I don't know, flyer on K. Lang plus 550, but it's just hard when everything feels so set up for a guy like Rosas Jr. to come out with an impressive showcase victory here. Flyweight, we got Edgar Chairez against Joshua Van. Edgar Chairez was supposed to fight Kevin Borjas on this card. And Joshua Van looking to come back with a quick victory from losing in that upset knockout to Charles Johnson. Steps in on late notice. That's why people love Joshua Van. He is the minus 235 favorite. Chairez, the plus 200 underdog. Let's start off with Edgar Chairez. Did win his last fight against Daniel Lacerda, a first round triangle choke. The whole thing with Daniel Lacerda, okay. And like that's 2 fights. Almost a year of his life was taken up by Daniel Lacerda. And 21 strikes landed, 2 fights that ended in the first round, a no contest and a win for Chairez. Okay. We're past Daniel Lacerda now. And it's hard because he lost on the Contender Series to Clayton Carpenter. And then in his UFC debut to Tatsuro Taira. Both very hard, like, you lose to Clayton Carpenter, I'm definitely not impressed. You lose to Tatsuro Taira, you could be like the number 3 flyweight in the world. Who knows? That's not Edgar Chairez in this situation. Born in 1996, though, he's not an old dude. But you know who's not old is Joshua the Fearless Van. Or is it the Fearless Joshua Van? That sounds a lot better. So he won 3 fights in a row coming into the UFC, 2 decision victories where he landed a combined 276 strikes against Zalga Zumagulov and Kevin Borjas, who was supposed to be fighting Edgar Chairez. 2 takedowns against Borjas, too. Gets a second-round knockout against Felipe Bunez January of this year. Tries to come back, get his 4th win in the UFC, gets knocked out in the 3rd round by Charles Johnson. In a fight that Charles Johnson was winning, probably, by a pretty steady rate up until that point. a lot of people are on Charles Johnson. Charles Johnson has looked great. He's a guy that you could definitely see like hanging around and being a really fun fan favorite factor, for a long time in the UFC. One of those guys that can hang around longer than you would have expected at the beginning. I don't see any reason to not go Joshua Van by decision here. Could it happen by knockout? Absolutely. And I think that that's probably the second best prop. So Joshua Van to win by decision is plus 115. For Van to win by knockout is plus 360. All right. This is a short notice fight for Van. I think that weighs more on the side of winning by decision. And I love Joshua Van in DFS this week. I think, in a 3-round fight with Chirez, I think he lands triple-digit strikes. And that is if he doesn't get the knockout before that. What's the route to victory for Chirez? I don't know. Probably like submission. That's plus 750 for him. Decision plus 340. I just see... I find it very hard to believe that over the course of 3 rounds, he would be better than Joshua Van in 2 of those rounds. And, another number... like Joshua Van, win inside the distance, no action, minus 170. I think that is a pretty good number too. I think that you could go with Van by decision or by knockout, and I think that it's going to be a good number. Van by knockout is fair, and Van by decision plus 115 I think is probably the top value. Chirez was able to go 3 rounds and knock down Tatsuro Taira. And I think Tatsuro Taira is, more dangerous in more ways. Maybe not percentage-wise in his finishes, maybe, than Joshua Van. But no, he's only had to win 2 fights by decision out of 6 in the UFC. So if he was able to go the distance against Tatsuro Taira, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt that he makes it 3 rounds against Joshua Van. But I think Joshua Van does win this fight like 75 to 80 times out of 100. Credit to him. I hope he bounces back with a win and gets himself right back in the conversation for another fun fight against a really relevant opponent at 125 pounds. Next up, we've got a women's strawweight matchup between Yasmin Uruguay and Ketlin Sousa. Ketlin Sousa is the plus 335 underdog. Yasmin, the minus 425 favorite. Let's start with Ketlin Sousa, all right? Somehow because of her name, I always forget that she's like brand new to the UFC. For some reason, the name Ketlin Sousa, it just sounds like someone that we've seen fighting in the UFC since 2017.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
No, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
I just wanted to drink a water, and that was a pretty random soundbite for that one. Ketlin Sousa lost in her UFC debut by submission against Karine Silva. Bounced back April of this year with a unanimous decision victory over Marnik Man, 80-31 in the striking. She did get taken down 2-1. Yasmin Uruguay, winner of 3 of 4 at the UFC level. 2 decisions over Eisman Lucindo and Sam Hughes. She landed a combined 180 strikes in those 2 fights. Hold on. There we go. 180 strikes in those 2 decision victories combined. In her second-round knockout victory over Estela Nunes, she notched 2 knockdowns and survived one by Estela Nunes. She did get knocked out in the first round by Denise Gomez. And that came in July of last year. So... And by the way, Yasmin, born in 1999, as opposed to Ketlin Sousa, born in 1994. I think you just have to do a strength of resume comparison and kind of the eye test here, where we've seen Yasmin against 2 to 3 opponents that I would consider of admirable quality, passable quality in Nunes, Lucindo, and Sam Hughes. Denise Gomez... has won 3 of her last 4, with the only loss being to Angela Hill, and her only 2 losses, being to Hill and Loma Lubunmak. She did get knocked out in the first round without landing a strike, granted, But I love that the striking volume has been there for Yasmin in pretty much every fight. The power has been there for her, and a lot of those strikes are damaging. Any fighter that is able to get 2 knockdowns at straw weight, that is an impressive feat. It's power that not all of your peers possess. So, Yasmin, here we're just trying to find the value on her because Caitlin Souza plus 355, I just don't know enough about her to think that number is a good value. And I think over 2.5 minus 275, under 2.5 is plus 215. That isn't absurd. It's not absurd. I don't love it, but it does catch me as something that's not unreasonable. Yasmin by decision, minus 200. Yasmin by knockout, plus 300. Honestly, I don't hate Yasmin by knockout, plus 300. For whatever was that submission that finished Caitlin Souza in her UFC debut, I don't know. I think Yasmin is a better fighter by a pretty good margin. And the win over Marnik Man just tells me very, very little against Caitlin Souza. And I'm not saying,
don't do this. You cannot do this,
because this is the women's strawweight division. We see, transitions like this all the time. But by decision, minus 200 for a strawweight who has already shown that she has, good power and knockout capability against a fighter whose best win is Marnik Man, and that's in 2 UFC fights after losing your debut. I think Yasmin wins this fight 80 to 85 times out of 100. I think that she is possibly worth that, whatever the price tag is going to be in DFS, but there's some hard hitters on this one, so I don't know if that's best where the higher money is spent. Having said that, I do think Yasmin by knockout plus 300 is the best value there. Maybe not the most likely, but it is the best value to me. Hit it. Been doing so many Zooms, I forgot about all these sound bites and how to use them. But anyway, next up, we had a lightweight matchup between Manuel Torres and Ignacio Bahamondes. In DFS, I cannot fault you for choosing either of these dudes, and this fight should end in spectacular fashion. I think that this is, this is one that people are definitely looking forward to. This is 2 fighters, that you want to see on this card matched up with each other. They're 2 young dudes, both from South America. So, Manuel Torres is the minus 120 favorite. Ignacio, the plus 100 underdog. Let's start with Ignacio because it's been a saga of trust for me with Ignacio. For so many fights that you could watch over the last few years and see, he was killing it, Second round knockout against Edson Gomez on the Contender Series. 105 strikes and a third-round knockout of Roosevelt Roberts. A third-round submission after 126 strikes against Rong Zhu. 99 strikes in a unanimous decision against Trey Ogden. And a first-round knockout over Christos Giagos April of this year. 2 losses in between there, where he still lands 112 strikes against John McDessie in a split decision loss. And then that unanimous decision loss to Ludwig Klein, that was the one that I think I got burned on by him. But really looking at this, my God, he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and the only loss are to Ludwig Klein and John McDessie. That's very admirable. This is a dude born in 1997, who's now been in the UFC for about 4 years. Manuel Torres, born in 1995, has not lost in the UFC. This guy has not had the opportunity to rack up triple-digit strikes because he has ended every fight in the first round against Colton England on the Contender Series with a knockout. A knockout of Frank Camacho in his real UFC debut. A knockout against Nicholas Mata June of last year, and a rear naked choke against Chris Duncan February of this year. Very early. All these fights ending in the first round as that quality of opponent continues to go up over time. That was very impressive for Manuel Torres. And look, I think I have to opt for Manuel Torres here. I think that when this fight is so closely handicapped, minus 120, it's not unfavorable for either dude. I see the logic behind it all. If it goes to decision, I think that it's very logical to say that, Ignacio, this could be a toss-up. And I actually think that it's very interesting to think about Ignacio by split decision when this is a guy that has proven that he can go the distance in the UFC so many times, landing triple-digit strikes, and even landing triple-digit strikes and, being able to put people away, as late as the third round. But Ignacio by split decision is plus 1,200. Think real hard about that one.
Break out the red panties.
But having said that, I do think that you have to favor Manuel Torres here. Still, you could look at the Roosevelt Roberts, Rong Zhu, Trey Ogden, and Christos Giagos wins in many different ways. It's all sort of even. And not to say that they're all the same quality opponent, but I would put them all in the same tier of what those wins kind of tell me about you and the way that he did it. I love people who demonstrate that they can, strike in consistently like Bahamon does. But Manuel Torres, his two last wins even, against Nicholas Mata and Chris Duncan, I already think I was more impressed with those and how amazing he looked in those fights and in all of his fights at the UFC level. I don't know if he puts him away in the first round. This fight not going the distance is minus 350, and over under 1.5 is even money at minus 115. Manuel Torres inside the distance makes sense. That's minus 125. No, wait. No. Inside the distance, Manuel Torres plus 120. Bahamondes plus 150. That actually seems a little skewed weirdly towards Bahamondes for a guy that's actually won fights by decision. And he hasn't lost inside the distance. To be fair, Manuel Torres would have to be the first one to do it, but I think he is by far the most well-equipped. So, that's where I'm going. I think Manuel Torres inside the distance plus 120 is what I said. I think Bahamondes by split decision plus 1,200 is absolutely worth a sprinkle. And I do think Manuel Torres probably wins this fight probably 55 to 60 times out of 100. Maybe 60 to 62 or 63. So if you just want to go straight money line, either way with one of these guys, I think it's fair. This is a really close matchup. And, if you end up on the right side of this bet, I think it's going to be a really fun fight to watch because it was already going to be a fun fight to watch. So if it results in profit, all the better. Next up, we got a women's bantamweight matchup between Irene Aldana and Norma Dumont. Norma Dumont this is pick 'em right now. This is a minus 110 each fighter. So let's start off with Irene Aldana. Okay. It actually seems like it's been, I forgot it was Carol Rosa, who I often get mixed up with Irene Aldana, frankly. Irene Aldana has won 3 of her last 4 fights and 5 of her last 7. Vanessa Mello on that list, Ketlin Vieira. The last 3 have been against Yana Santos, formerly Yana Kunitskaya. She knocked her out in the first round. She knocked out Macy Chiasson in the third round. She gets dominated by Amanda Nunes. Juna last year by unanimous decision, 142 to 41 in the strikes, taken down 6 times. And then she ends up beating Carol Rosa by unanimous decision at UFC 296. Carol Rosa did outstrike her 204 to 145 at UFC 296. But, Irene Aldana ends up getting the victory there. It was 29-28 on all 3 judges' scorecards. Norma Dumont is 2 years younger. She will actually be at a 1-inch reach disadvantage, which actually seems crazy. It's crazy how big Irene Aldana is. 5'9" with a 68-inch reach here. And Norma is someone who I always think is big, but not next to Irene Aldana. Norma Dumont has won 7 of her last 8 fights in the UFC. She lost a UFC debut to Megan Anderson all the way back in February of 2020. She's remained super active. active enough, very consistently active over those 4 years. Wins over Ashley Evans Smith, Felicia Spencer, Aspen Ladd. Did lose a split decision to Macy Chiasson. May of 2022 at UFC 274. Outstruck her 38-32, taken down 6 times to 0. Now she's on a 4-fight winning streak. All unanimous decisions against Danielle Wolf, who she did knock down. Carol Rosa, who she survived a knockdown from. Chelsea Chandler, July of last year by unanimous decision, 47-22 in the striking, 3 takedowns to 1. And then Jermaine Day Rondemy, April of this year, 16-11 in the striking for Jermaine, but 6 takedowns for Norma Dumont. Yeah, I don't know. I do like Norma's price in DFS this week because she's lower priced than Irene Aldana. This being even money seems kind of nuts. Not just comparing like the results against Macy Chiasson, but Norma, I just don't think does enough on the feet damage-wise, or at least to be able to keep up with Irene Aldana. Irene Aldana has been taken down like 3 times by Macy Chiasson. She got taken down 5 times by Holly Holm, 6 times by Amanda Nunes. That is a different class of opponent, but like Norma, I just don't know if this should be pick'em, because I think in the stand-up, maybe Norma can keep pace in the volume, but I don't think she will in the damage. I think Irene is going to do more damage. And so I think that you really need to think that Norma gets those 5 to 6 takedowns, or like, at least 3, at least, a couple spread out over a few rounds. And then you have to think that like she does actually keep pace on the feet. To be able to get a split decision. And by the way, Irene Aldana, and it doesn't have to be split, obviously. That's kind of guessing. But knowing who these fighters are. Irene by split decision plus 475. Norma by split decision plus 500. This is definitely one where we could see that. I think the smartest pick here right now is Irene Aldana by decision plus 115. Norma by decision plus 120. I just don't think that these two fighters are as close as this is currently handicapped. I think Norma Dumont is a great UFC women's bantamweight, and I give her the credit for the opponents that she's faced, how much winning she has done. But, looking back at a Chelsea Chandler win, it's just not as impressive. And looking back at a Jermaine Day Rondemy win this year over a 40-year-old fighter who had not fought since October of 2020, I just have way more questions. And yeah, like, you can't do necessarily the comparisons against Macy Chiasson. She could have beaten Macy and gotten that other judge on any given night. But Irene Aldana put Macy away. There's a difference there. And every fight Norma Dumont has had in the UFC since her debut against Megan Anderson has gone the distance. Even if it was 5 rounds, and that happened against Aspen Ladd. So, and this fight going the distance, is minus 400. So I do like Norma Dumont in DFS because I think that her chances to win align with the price that she is in DraftKings and on FanDuel. But I don't think it aligns with this being pick'em. I think Irene Aldana is the better fighter here. Norma's going to need those takedowns because Irene is going to be doing more damage standing up. Norma Dumont, had to survive that knockdown from Carol Rosa, and I don't know if she does survive that knockdown if it comes against Irene Aldana at the wrong time. Norma Dumont has knocked down other fighters before. Danielle Wolf, Ashley Evans Smith, and that's actually where it stops. So, yeah, that's where I land on that one. It's crazy that this one hasn't happened yet. There's only so many matchups to make at the upper levels of women's bantamweight, but I'm glad this one is happening now. It's a great fight for UFC Noche. Next up, we've got a flyweight matchup between Ronaldo Rodriguez and Ode Osborne. I feel like I haven't heard excuse me. I feel like I haven't heard that name in a relevant context in a while with how much action there's been going on at flyweight. The dude's been forgotten. And now Ode Osborne is the plus 125 underdog. Ronaldo Rodriguez the minus 145 favorite. Well, call me crazy, but Ode Osborne.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
No, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
Ronaldo Rodriguez, lazy boy, 16-2 as a pro, 25 years old, currently ranked number 42 in the world after just one UFC fight, a second round rear naked choke against Dennis Bondar. Came in from Lux Fight League, with his last fight before that being May of 2023. A lot of finishes in this dude's run. 7 wins by knockout, 5 by submission, 3 by decision. I got to take issue with one thing, though, is he was on the Contender Series 4 years ago. Granted, he was 21 years old. So, absolutely take that with a grain of salt. But you lose by unanimous decision to Jerome Rivera. You know that my feelings on Jerome Rivera were never that high. And that dude's riding a 4-fight losing streak right now and hasn't fought since July of 2021. Enough about Jerome Rivera. Ronaldo Rodriguez, to come back with that win against Dennis Bondar in his UFC debut, that was a big deal because people hold Dennis Bondar in high enough regard, or they did. It was always a guy that we thought could do well, but lost all 3 fights in the UFC. But against Malcolm Gordon and Carlos Hernandez, it's understandable. But Dennis Bondar ended up not hanging. And then we got Ode Osborne. Osborne, who has lost 2 in a row, 3 of his last 4. And crazily enough, this dude's actually been in the UFC for a good amount of fights. Fought twice in 2022, twice in 2023. Made his debut on the Contender Series back in 2019. Wins over Jerome Rivera by first-round knockout. A unanimous decision against CJ Vergara. A first-round knockout over Zaruk Adashev. And a split decision win over Charles Johnson. The 3 opponents that he lost to since August of 2022, Tyson Nam by knockout, Asil Almabayev by rear naked choke, and Jafel Fio by rear naked choke. And Ronaldo Rodriguez, his 2 pro losses have both been by decision. That bodes well, for Ode Osborne here. I guess. I don't think there's, any awesome way to say that a guy's 16-2 and look how his losses came. But Ronaldo Rodriguez, I still can't be completely sold on your resume. Even though it was 4 years ago that you lost to Jerome Rivera, the UFC debut against Dennis Bondar, how much am I to take from that? Ode Osborne has fought a lot of really good UFC flyweights. He fought Manel Kape and got knocked out, granted. It's been an up and down road for Ode Osborne, but I think he's due for one. I think that we've just seen him be too good in the UFC against a caliber of opponent that we just can't say that Ronaldo Rodriguez is at the level of yet. If he beats Ode Osborne probably needs to go, and Ronaldo Rodriguez definitely gets to stay. Figuratively, I suppose. But, the Charles Johnson win looks better with time. And, Vergara and... where did we go wrong with Ode Osborne? Was it just putting him in the rankings too early, or was that just where flyweight was at the time? Either way, right? And by the way, to go back, I do think Irene Aldana wins that fight 60 to 65 times out of 100. And here, I think Ode Osborne wins this fight 55 times out of 100. Maybe, yeah, I think 55 is fair. I think that is a fair level of skepticism. Either way, Ode Osborne plus 125, hit it. If I'm going Ronaldo Rodriguez, I do go just inside the distance. So that's plus 155. I think that's decent. I think that's kind of what we would expect, from a guy who ends up catching Ode Osborne by surprise and ends up being worth the hype and actually has that talent at 25 years old. If I'm going Osborne, a prop, by decision plus 300, I don't, I don't yet know that he is capable of finishing Ronaldo Rodriguez. I don't think you need to go method of victory here, and I think it's completely acceptable to take Ode Osborne in DFS too, just because, if he wins, he's cheap, than he should be, and it'll probably score all right. And best case scenario, he gets a knockout and he ends up being really worth it. But Rodriguez, inside the distance, go Ode Osborne straight up on the money line plus 125. Next up, we've got a lightweight matchup between Daniel Zellhuber and Esteban Ribovic. Ribovic is the plus 185 underdog. Daniel Zellhuber, the minus 220 favorite. Esteban Ribovic.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
With that, let's start off with Daniel Zellhuber. Winner of 4 of 5 in the UFC, counting the Contender Series. 2 decisions over Lucas Almeida and Lando Veneta. Landed a combined 193 strikes across those 2 fights. Got a knockdown against Lando Veneta. Anaconda choke against Christos Giagos September of last year. And a unanimous decision victory over Francisco Prado with 120 strikes. That was at UFC Fight Night Moreno versus Roybal Dos. I like another guy, he either finishes you or he lands a good amount of strikes against you. Love to see it from Daniel Zellhuber. I think that he's maybe a little too expensive in DFS this week because I think that's just a little bit inflated from the fact that people are sleeping on Esteban Ribovic. To go to Ribovic, born in 1996, he is not, old by any stretch, even though, Daniel Zellhuber, born in 1999, winner of 3 of 4 of the UFC, counting the Contender Series, a knockout over Thomas Paul, August of 2022. He then takes his only loss in the UFC and his only loss as a pro by unanimous decision to Loik Radzhabov. He got taken down 11 times and got a knockdown in that fight. A unanimous decision over Kamela Kirk. Got taken down 3 times to 2, but landed 115 strikes to 56, and then gets a first-round knockout when he comes back May of this year against Terrence T-Rex McKinney. This seems crazy, because I also forgot to mention Daniel Zellhuber's unanimous decision loss to Trey Ogden. It only took 1 takedown. He only landed 52 strikes in that. Ogden only needed 71. This is a philosophy play too, where it's like, what am I supposed like? Zellhuber having an 8-inch reach advantage, and being what 3 inches taller. That's probably conservative. That's gonna matter here for sure. That is like the biggest thing that Esteban Ribovic is fighting past, but. The Terrence T-Rex McKinney win, and the win against Kamela Kirk before that, the fact that the only guy that's beaten Esteban Ribovic as a pro needed to take him down 11 times to do it and barely survived the heat that Esteban Ribovic was throwing. So, this is another one. This is probably my, tied with Ode Osborne right now for favorite underdog. But Ribovic, I think that could be a 50-50 fight. I think the resumes are extremely comparable in terms of the quality of wins. Statistically, Ribovic impresses me just as much as Daniel Zellhuber has at his best. And the loss to Trey Ogden, that's also kind of forgettable. Nothing against Trey Ogden because he's won, 3 of his last 5 fights, including a win over Loik Radzhabov, where he got 4 takedowns. It's just that, Daniel Zellhuber, I really don't think he's never attended. He hasn't attempted a single takedown since the Contender Series, September of 2021, and he got 1. Or maybe he has attempted them, but he hasn't landed 1. So maybe those attempts work a little bit better against Esteban Ribovic if he's coming forward and throwing heat. But I just think the resumes are way too comparable for plus 185. I think Ribovic wins this fight maybe 50 times out of 100. Give me Esteban Ribovic plus 185 on the money line. And Ribovic by knockout plus 550. Ribovic by decision plus 400. Those are very close in value to me. Zellhuber by decision is probably the best way to go for him plus 130. I think that's the most realistic method of victory prop for either of these guys. I don't feel the need to go method of victory for Esteban Ribovic. Plus 185 is good enough for me. And I like him in DFS too because he's super cheap. Like 7.2K on DraftKings right now, I think. Interesting how that line sets up. I wonder if there's any betting bias towards any fighters from Mexico this week. That could make some sense because that also might explain a little bit of Ronaldo Rodriguez. Anyway, next up, We're to the big hitters now in terms of name value. A featherweight matchup between Brian T. City Ortega and Diego Lopez. This fight was supposed to happen a little bit of time ago. They had to what? They were going to take it up to lightweight because Brian Ortega couldn't cut the weight. The fight didn't end up happening. Diego Lopez gets a last second replacement with Dan Ige. Makes good on delivers a good performance. Ige did too. It was a fun fight. Now that's like two quasi kind of ranking quality victories for Diego Lopez against Sadiq Youssef and Dan Ige. It's been a great 4-fight winning streak with 3 first-round finishes against Gavin Tucker, Pat Sabatini, Youssef, and then the decision against Dan Ige. Not going to hold it against him either for not finishing Dan Ige because 1, Dan Ige is tough. 2, what weird circumstances to be fighting under. And he started off his UFC career with 2 straight decision losses to Joannis Brito and Movsar Evloev. So we've seen Diego Lopez vulnerable. We have seen him bounce back in tremendous ways. And it's not like he's super young. He's about to be 30 this year. He's also going to be focused on cornering Alexa Grasso after this fight. So that's an interesting aspect to this. T-City, only 3 years older. Winner in 2 of his last 4. Ended up getting the arm triangle victory against Yair Rodriguez, February 2024. That's important because, there's this, Yair Rodriguez has obviously been around the block a lot too. And to go back in time, T-City's last win before that was October of 2020 against the Korean Zombie in dominant fashion. I mean, the run that he had from, Clay Guida, Renato Moicano, Cub Swanson, Frankie Edgar, then the loss to Max Holloway, and then gets another title shot against Volk. He's been through the ringer and had over 500 strikes landed against him from Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway. So after 2 years, to be able to bounce back from that, that injury loss to Yair Rodriguez and end up getting this submission in a fight where he was in danger too. He got knocked down. Rodriguez had landed 55 strikes to Ortega's 28. So he was definitely in danger. But to see him come back and win was a big deal. And it did remind us who he is. And I should probably mention what the odds are here. Lopez, the minus 180 favorite. Ortega, the plus 155 underdog. That part is... I feel like I would like Ortega if he was a bit more of an underdog. Because I would kind of think that he is Diego Lopez has all the momentum in the world here. He's been a rising star, for a little bit of time now. People really like him. They want to see this guy rise. And the love for Ortega has kind of come by the wayside when people don't see it for a long time. And then all that stuff with the weight cut when these guys were supposed to fight back in June at UFC 303. So, plus 155 isn't super enticing. And this is one where I don't even really want to pick a method of victory because it could be any combination of things. What, Lopez by it probably won't be Lopez by submission. Lopez by knockout, that seems really tough too. What it took to finish Brian Ortega. You'd have to bet on him being pretty damaged because he survived everything from Volk. And it took 290 shots over the course of 4 rounds to lose to Max Holloway. So Lopez by decision plus 200. T-City by decision plus 300. T-City by knockout plus 625. God, those are all an absolute toss-up. This is one where I'm kind of staying away from. In DFS, I think both of them are playable. Ortega is cheaper, and I ended up incorporating him into a couple of my lineups. I think, I can still say Ortega, in the most pessimistic of circumstances, wins this fight, 40, 45 times out of 100. Could still be more. We don't really know how much gas is left in that tank. Maybe sprinkle some on plus 155 for fun. This is one where I think there's just too many outcomes and too many question marks, especially when comparing resumes, comparing damage taken in the UFC, comparing level of opponents fought, the results that they had. This one's a twister, and I wish I could have discussed this with Connor. Going to be rooting for Diego Lopez, no matter who the money for me is on, just because Lopez, that guy has a future. I think we've seen Ortega at his best. It's not a championship level. Diego Lopez could still get there. And I'm always rooting for the guys that are, obviously I think a lot of us like to look to the future. And if there's going to be a win for somebody, for it to be practical, it sends people up in a reasonable way. I think that's more the way to describe it. Maybe over 2.5 minus 120 isn't horrible here. Because, Ortega's been a lot of, wars that lasted that length and longer. Did Diego Lopez finish him under 2.5 rounds? I don't think so. And, I think that in tipping the cat to Diego Lopez's talent and thinking that Brian Ortega is probably a rightful underdog, I think over 2.5 minus 120 is probably the best bet you're going to get on that one. And now, we are to the co-main event of the evening. And this one is for the Women's Flyweight Championship of the World, following them being the coaches on Tough 32, the champion. Hailing from Mexico, Alexa Grasso against the former champion Valentina Shevchenko, the Bullet. Alexa Grasso is the minus 140 favorite, Shevchenko the plus 120 underdog. Let's start with Valentina. All right, I could talk a lot about her. Going back to 2015 in the UFC when she debuted, getting the win over Sarah Kaufman. Who she beat? Kaufman, Holm, Juliana, Priscilla, Joanna, Jessica Ai, Liz Carmouche, Caitlin Chukagian, Jennifer Maia, Jessica Andrade, Lauren Murphy. So many of these were in a row, too. Tyler Santos. Did she, though? Did she beat her? And then gets subbed by Alexa Grasso. Their first fight ends up in a split draw. Last time out. September of 2023, and that's how we get to where we are today. Alexa Grasso was the one with the knockdown. Shevchenko, got 4 takedowns in that fight. The striking was 84-80. Both these fights were very interesting statistically. I remember Alexa looking like the better fighter in my blood for the better part of those 9 rounds that fight lasted. But statistically, Valentina, racked up 167 strikes and 8 takedowns across those 2 fights. So you see how these crazy results happen. If this goes the distance again, because of Valentina, the skill set that she has long perfected, absolutely I could see another, split result coming. Alexa Grasso, what she's done...
I don't know that one.
that was all right, I just have to say Grasso. I'm just going to say Grasso now because there is an Amazon product in the room, and so I can't say Grasso's first name. How did I not think that through? Grasso had 5 wins in a row against Yi Jian Kim, Macy Barber, Joanne Wood, Vivian Araujo, and Valentina Shevchenko. All right, then we come to the split draw. This is a fighter that, lost to Carla Esparza and Tatiana Suarez and Felice Herrig. That was a different time in her career when she was a strawweight. As soon as she moves up to flyweight, things start to go very differently. You see that happen. And here's the thing. This is another one where Valentina is 37 years old. Okay? We long looked at Valentina as, she was the Amanda Nunes of flyweight. And if Amanda Nunes didn't exist, we would be talking about Valentina Shevchenko as that Amanda Nunes, that idol that existed for women's MMA. And to have both of them operating at the same time across divisions was an absolute gift for so long. But at 37, the chances that you recapture a title after losing it are incredibly slim. And I have to go with that eye test feeling on those last 2 fights, feeling like Alexa Grasso was the better fighter. Definitely, Valentina obviously did well statistically. But, and maybe that first fight, we were so surprised that Grasso was doing as well as she did against Valentina that it was, because it was a bit of a comeback, statistically. I think she was probably losing on the judges' scorecards. I should have looked into that. I'm going based off memory right now for what happened March of last year. But that last time out, I do think Alexa Grasso was the better fighter. And I even think I took Valentina, on the sentiment of is that fluke? We're talking about the bullet, against a fighter that really didn't capture my attention too heavily before she fought for the title. At this point, you got to go with the numbers that suggest that a fighter at the age of 37 does not recapture a title once they've lost it. And it'd be different if it was like a 37-year-old GSP against a Matt Serra. But Alexa Grasso has just continued to look better and better. And, she's, younger by 5 years. So it's not like she's like super young. But we've just seen such a difference for Grasso since she became a flyweight. Even though she's had some statistically close results. So I do think that like Alexa Grasso minus 140 isn't horrible. I like her in DFS too because she is not expensive at all. She wasn't in DraftKings. She was like $19 in FanDuel as I last saw it. In FanDuel, I don't know, maybe Valentina Shevchenko is the way to go. And if it was like plus 165, plus 185, it's a whole different conversation about Shevchenko. This is a little bit too close. Over 4.5 is minus 210 in this one. To go the distance, minus 180. Interesting numbers there. But Alexa Grasso by decision, plus 175. By submission, plus 400. I don't know if it happens by submission again. I do think that, inside the distance, plus 230, that's all right. I think I'd rather take that than by submission or by knockout for Alexa Grasso. I do think that this most likely goes to decision. And I think if you wanted to go like Alexa Grasso by split decision, plus 550 to sprinkle a little bit on that, I think that this is another one where it makes sense, especially just the stylistic differences of these two fighters, where their strengths and their weaknesses lie. I think that it's just one where we could end up with a fight that 100 people judge 100 different ways. So Grasso minus 140, I think it's solid. Inside the distance, I think that is logical, as Valentina gets older, and this is now the third fight between them. But they've had so long to think about each other. I do think that this fight most likely goes the distance. I don't know, Grasso by split decision, plus 550, pretty appealing. Think about hitting it. And now, folks, we are to the main event of UFC Noche.
Break out the red panties.
And this is for the UFC Bantamweight Championship between Sugar Sean O'Malley and Merab Dvalishvili. Merab Dvalishvili. God, those Georgian last names are tough. Sugar Sean, the reigning champion, minus 131. Merab, the underdog, plus 111. Let's start off with Merab. Merab has not lost in the UFC since April of 2018 when he got subbed by Ricky Simone. He lost his first 2 fights in the UFC. The first one was to Frankie Sands. Has been on a tear since then. All right, the activity really hasn't been there. I mean, he fought once in 2022, once in 2023, has already fought once this year. And there's a lot of like those statistics coming out about Merab this week about like Merab has attempted like 90 takedowns over his last 5 fights. He didn't land, a very high percentage of them. I think it was 25%. Sure. Okay. But Merab over his last 2 fights against Peter Yan and Henry Cejudo, 16 combined takedowns. 221 combined strikes across those unanimous decisions. With a unanimous decision against Jose Aldo, August of 2022, in which he didn't have to land a single takedown to win that fight. But, you could throw out all these statistics and people are going to hate, a lot of people don't like Merab. Hell, a lot of people don't like Sean O'Malley, obviously. These guys inspire strong emotions. But Merab taking down an Olympian, Henry Cejudo, 5 times, outlanding him 74-29, a former 2-division champion, You do that to two straight former champions? And Petr Yan, my God. 16 takedowns across those two fights. Throw out whatever statistics you want about takedown efficiency. It is hard to beat someone when they take you down 5 to 11 times and outstrike you by a margin of at least 50 in those fights. Sean O'Malley. All right. Winner of 3 in a row. And it very well could have been winner of like 7 in a row. If he had ended up, not having the no contest against Pedro Munoz, whatever. The only loss on his record in the UFC, well known as that first round TKO against Marlon Vera, where he got hurt. As he claims, still undefeated. The best wins, obviously, like it really stepped up. They pumped him up with that Eddie Wineland knockout, and it was highlight material. But